Welcome back to lesson 6 of our basics class, data cleanup. Um, so this lesson is really to prepare your data for sort of the next step, the pivot tables. Um, so primarily, I'm going to jump across a couple of different lessons while we talk here. The problem that Excel has is and one of the biggest errors you run into when you're trying to create pivot tables is you get this data and it looks like it's a date. But is it really a date? You get a number. It looks like it's a numeric value, but is it really? You see that all the time in zip codes where you lose the leading zeros in a zip code. You see it sometimes in product part numbers where you lose zeros. Sometimes you'll see phone numbers that are formatted as regular numbers or social security numbers, although you really probably shouldn't have a lot of those in your tables. But one of the things that we run into often is dates. A lot of different reports come into our office that look like they should be dates, but then aren't really. So before you go and try to put it into a pivot table like this, where you have your dates running across, before you get an opportunity to do that, you have to make sure they are in fact dates. So let's get back to the data cleanup and how do you check? This looks like a date. All these things look more or less like dates. How can we check to be sure that they really are? So I've used a function here, is error date value B3. So let's look at what the date value function really does and what it's supposed to tell us. So you give it a number that is in this format and it converts it to a date that Microsoft will recognize. So this is what Microsoft is looking for as a date. So I said here, is error date value? So, short answer, the value in this cell is already a date. So that's why date value doesn't convert it. The value here is already a date that Microsoft will recognize. Now, here, this is not a date. And so we used the date value function to convert it to one. Now, not every date, these are relatively straightforward as date conversions go. Something like this is a little bit harder for Microsoft. Um, so here I've said, okay, is this a date? What's the date value? And there's two ways to convert this. So here I basically said, all right, I'm going to take the left 4 characters. So it's going to start here and grab 4 characters. Then I'm going to take the middle 2 characters, starting at character 6. So you've got to go 1, 2, 3, 4. The 5th character here is the hyphen, and the 6th character is the 0. So starting at the 0, give me 2 characters. So that gives me the 0, 6. And then the right, so now it's going to start at the right edge and just go backwards 2 characters. So that will convert that into the right type of data string. Also, something that when you're trying to match values, oftentimes you have extra spaces. So sometimes when you import the data, you can see here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit, here that there's leading spaces in front of here. So I used the trim command and looked at how long, this is the command called length, L-E-N, how long is A4 and then how long is B4. The other thing you get, and again, it makes it really hard when you're trying to match either part numbers or date strings or other values, is that your data has trailing spaces. So here, if I just look at this, it looks the exact same as this. But if I go up here and edit it, you can see there's a number of spaces that come after it. So from here, this is the length of the original, and then if I use the trim command, this is the length of it afterwards. And the trim command will also remove extra spaces that are internal to a string. So again, not super obvious, but there's 2 spaces in here, and the trim command reduces those 2 spaces down to 1 space. So there you go. That is preparing your data to clean up. So if you have a big long column of data, a bunch of dates that you're going to have to convert, what I normally do is take that date string. So if I had a whole column of these types of dates, then I would use my function like this, and then normally I would say Control C, copy that data. I'd then just go back to the original source and Alt Edit Special, and then choose Values, and then OK. Now it converted it to the Microsoft string format, so I'll go in here and tell it to use the short date format. And there you go. So now I can delete this function and move on with whatever else I was doing. So that'll wrap it up for the data cleanup, and we'll bounce back to the next lesson in the intermediate series and begin our pivot tables.